Hello everyone and welcome to another casual review. Today I'm talking about Sea of Stars. Sea of Stars is a turn-based role-playing game where you assume the role of two Solstice warriors. There's Zale, who is the sword-wielding Sun Solstice warrior, and then I think her name is pronounced Valir, who is like this monk wielding a staff who's like the Moon Solstice warrior. Of course, you pick up other party members along the way. One of the main characters is a guy named Garl, who is known as the Warrior Cook, and he's basically like Zale's and Valir's best friend, who is not a Solstice warrior, but he's just along to help with their adventures. The idea of Solstice warriors is they are like these special warriors that can take down these evil things called dwellers, and dwellers basically like threaten the existence of the world. The thing about dwellers is only the Solstice warriors can significantly do damage to them, and usually that is only if there is an eclipse that is present. The story starts out with our Solstice warriors going out to defeat the last known dweller. Without giving too much away story-wise, obviously there is a lot more to it than that, but that is essentially like the premise of our going out and going on our adventure. As far as the combat itself, it's this active timing combat similar to something like Paper Mario, where if you press A at the correct time, then you will defend, therefore reducing the amount of damage you take. If you press A at the correct time when you're attacking someone, then you'll do bonus damage. However, the timing itself is not like Paper Mario at all. The timing is very unforgiving and difficult to nail down exactly. Unless you've had a lot of practice with their basic attacks, you can also press A at the correct time to boost the damage of their combos, which is also pretty difficult to nail down unless you practice a lot. It's not that much of a hand-holdy game just by the default setting, but if you want a little more of an easier time playing this game, they offer a thing called relics, and these are kind of cool. They affect various things about the gameplay. They can either make the gameplay significantly easier, or if you want to bump up the challenge, there's a couple of relics that do that for you. These are basically things that like make it so when you're attacking, you'll automatically do the double attack without hitting the A, or they reduce the amount of damage that enemies do to you. I didn't toggle on too many of these relics because I kind of wanted the default difficulty. The only ones that I did turn on is there is one that basically gives me like a visual cue telling me that I successfully inputted A at the correct time during combat, and then there's one that makes it so I can cook food faster, but I didn't really toggle on any of the other ones that could make the game significantly easier, but I like the way that they did this rather than just having you choose between easy difficulty, normal difficulty, hard difficulty. You can kind of like tweak it to your specifications, although I will say if there was a relic that would increase the timing window in order for me to successfully defend against enemy attacks, I probably would have turned that on. If there is one, then I did not find it during my gameplay. Enemies can hit pretty hard as well. It's not that big of a deal because you'll always have these campfires that are nearby that you can rest at and cook at to heal your health and MP. But yeah, like after maybe 2 or 3 hits, especially late game, your guys are going to be down. And I feel like the developers of the game kind of anticipated this, because once your character is down, they will automatically get back up after 2 sets of turns. It's not incredibly detrimental if your character faints, but it will hinder your combat. This game also takes some of its own liberties in terms of the turn-based combat. For one, your mana is regenerated when you basic hit an enemy, and so that's a good way to balance between doing your basic attacks and using your spells. You'll also, when you basic hit an enemy, you'll see these little orbs that fly off of the bad guys, and you can use these orbs to essentially like add elemental attacks to your basic attacks or increase your spells. And so it has this good balance of basic attacks and using your abilities. Enemies, when they're setting up to use a super strong attack, they will also have these icons called locks above their head, and these locks are essentially like if you use the right type of element to attack these enemies or the right type of weapon, if you destroy all of these locks, then the enemy's super strong attack will become become disrupted. And so it kind of becomes a game of, should I disrupt this enemy's super strong attack that they're gearing up for, or do I try to do as much damage as possible to them and potentially take them down before they can do a strong attack? The thing about these locks is they don't get revealed until you use the intended attack. Now, granted, there's abilities that will automatically reveal these locks, and there's also a relic that will make it so these locks are always visible to you, and so that just kind of it depends on how you want to play, really. Combos are also a thing where two of your party members can do an attack together, and then each character also gets their like own ultimate super cool visual attack. And so yeah, combat I think is pretty good. I think that they did a good job of keeping me engaged. I wasn't able to just do the most strongest attack over and over again. I didn't have my go-to routine, and so you kind of need to play each combat scenario depending on like what their locks are and how you're doing on mana and combo points and whether you need to build up on your basic attack orbs. But I also wouldn't say it is incredibly difficult either. I was playing on like the default difficulty without messing with the relics too much, and I don't think I ever got a game over. I also never felt the need to grind in terms of experience. They are pretty stingy with their level ups. By the end of the game, I was only in the level 20s, and I think that was kind of intended because by the time I got to the end game, there were only so many stats that I could choose to upgrade. It kind of works like Paper Mario, where whenever you level up, you can choose to allocate additional points to your attack power or your spell power or your health or your physical defense. And so I think by the end of the game, those stats started to get capped out where I wasn't able to allocate any more points into like the physical attack. The combat arena is actually kind of set up like Chrono Trigger, if you've ever played that game, where you can see the enemies in the overworld and you can basically like initiate an attack, so you can get like one free attack in before the combat initiates, and then all of the characters just move to their positions. And so it's not like Pokemon where you go from the overworld and then it transitions into like this battle scene. It's a lot more like Chrono Trigger where the overworld is the battle scene, which I really liked. You can have a max of 5 party members, and it kind of works like Final Fantasy X in that you can swap out which 3 party members are battling at the correct time, and you can kind of choose who attacks when. Now granted, during like a turn phase, all your characters are going to need to attack, so you can't just overload one party member and just attack with that one party member over and over again, but it does give you a little more freedom in terms of your strategy on when you want to swap out Valir for Garl, and depending on like what locks the enemies have as they're like charging up a super strong attack. Your party members also have the standard traditional equipment. As you go through towns, you can upgrade the weapons that your party members have or their armor. There are also these accessories that they can exchange between themselves, which do various things like, you know, increase your health or reveal the enemy's HP. But you definitely, unless you do grind, like you backtrack and you'll defeat the same enemies over and over again, you will not have enough money to purchase all of the potential upgrades for your characters. And so you do kind of have to choose when and where you want to purchase extra equipment upgrades for your party members. There is this hidden resource called conches that you can find throughout the world, and then you can kind of trade in those conches for potential upgrades. Most of these upgrades will help you create these buildings for this town that you started. Basically like, oh, now my town has like an inn, or now my town has a blacksmith. And so that's usually what most of these conches unlock. I never found all of the conches, and so I can't exactly attest when they stop giving you additional buildings to put in your town and start giving you other things. But it is always nice to have, like, you know, a little something to look for in all the nooks and crannies. You'll also be acquiring a lot of materials to cook at the campfires, and especially at the early game, because the enemies hit so hard, you'll definitely want to keep a lot of items available to you to restore your health and mana when needed. Fishing is also a thing in this game, which usually I don't mess around with fishing in video games, but I really liked the fishing in this game. Essentially, like when you go to these certain fishing spots, you'll see a sign that says what kind of aquatic life is in this fishing spot, and you basically like throw your fishing rod, and then you have to like reel in the fish shadow, and the fish shadow will be bouncing back and forth between this pathway, and you only really want to start reeling in the fish when it is in the pathway to make it so that your fishing line doesn't snap. It's like a simple but also engaging way to fish, and so I was able to catch every single fish in the game. If the Switch version had achievements, I bet I would unlock that fishing achievement for it. Visually, this game is top notch. I love the sprite-based work here. One of my favorite areas was near the beginning of the game where you are in this place with all these waterfalls, and the music is also really engaging. There were so many times when I would encounter like a big boss and they would do this really cool intro animation. It was like the perfect blend of nostalgic sprites, but also with this new fluid modern look as well. And I already mentioned the super cool over-the-top combos and ultimate abilities that your party can cast as well. I also like the variation in terms of exploring this big wide area. You start in this peaceful little town, and then you'll go to this dry deserty area, then this waterfall area, and then you go to this undead kind of place, and then pirates, and so they do a good job of keeping it visually interesting. The overworld kind of reminds me of Super Mario Bros. 3 actually. You're not going to be encountering any kind of combat, but you're using this overworld. It's like this huge top-down view as you're traveling to your different areas and towns and sailing over the ocean. You also, as Solstice Warriors, kind of have this ability to change the time of day, and so that adds these really cool shadow effects depending on like what time it is. You use this ability to solve certain kind of puzzles. I actually don't think that they utilize this function that much though. Like from what I can remember, maybe you're using this ability 5 or 6 times. You also unlock a couple of other abilities in order to traverse. Not many, but there are some, so it will allow you to like backtrack and acquire a couple things that you weren't able to get to the first time you went through some of these levels. There are occasionally the cinematics as well that are more hand-drawn rather than the sprite-based pixels. They were rather infrequent, but they were always pretty cool when they did happen. I feel like our Solstice Warriors could have used maybe a little more character development. Really, out of the party members that you do have, the one who gets the most screen time, I guess, would be Garl. And then there's also an assassin who gets a lot of backstory. Other than that, though, the other characters that you encounter, yeah, they get their beginning segments and stuff, but they don't have a ton of character development. But especially, like, it's just kind of weird that our main characters, Zale and Valir, probably have, like, the most boring character arcs in my opinion. They just get stronger, but they don't go through like too much emotional character growth and development. But the overall plot is really interesting, and I was really invested in this world of Solstice Warriors and Dwellers. Apparently this game was made by the same people who made the two-dimensional platformer called The Messenger, and there's actually like direct story ties between this game and that game. Now I have played through all of The Messenger, but this was years and years ago, so I don't really remember. There were some stuff where I'm like, it kind of reminds me of The Messenger, but I definitely think that I would need to go back and play through The Messenger in order to see the more direct ties between these two games. Still, it's cool that they have those ties, especially when they genre hopped between like a two-dimensional action platformer to an RPG like this. I don't feel like I missed out too much as far as the main story goes, not remembering what happened in The Messenger, but I do feel like there were a lot of little winks and nods that were set out to people who had played The Messenger. I do also feel like maybe the ending of this game leaves some things open for a potential sequel, or maybe they're planning on developing a game with a new genre that will kind of pick up some of the missing answers to the questions that I may have. But I do also feel like this game's story wrapped up pretty nicely, and I feel like especially like near the last fourth of the game got really interesting and kept me pretty engaged. There were some points mid-game that were a little bit more of a slog for me, but the visuals, the combat, and the music all kept me going during the slower points. I didn't 100% complete this game. After you beat the game, roll the credits, then there are a lot of post-game things for you to play through, lots of side quests that you have to do. Apparently one of them is like gather up all of the hidden conches and stuff. Anyway, if you do all that, you will unlock a supposedly true ending. I didn't really feel like doing that. I was happy with the time that I spent with it, and I was ready to move on to something else, so I just did what I imagined most people do, and you just looked up the YouTube video of the true ending. As far as the Switch version of this game, the loading times were more frequent and longer than I would have liked, but nothing too game-breaking. Apparently this game has multiplayer. I don't know what that necessarily looks like, but I feel like the Switch version would be a great opportunity to try that out, what with the detachable Joy-Cons. Other than the post-game content that I didn't do, I feel like every game nowadays needs to have like an additional little mini game that you play through as you are playing through the game. I was definitely reamed for not getting into the triple triad for Final Fantasy VIII, and I never played Gwent for The Witcher or anything like that. I usually just want to play like the main game. I'm not really interested in this sub-genre mini game kind of thing. This game has its own thing called Wheels, and I tried it out once just for the casual review. It wasn't my cup of tea though, so I was ready to move on. But the idea is it's basically like this card game kind of thing with statues, but then you have like a roulette where you spin the wheels and then you have to select like what roulette you want to keep. It's kind of like Yahtzee, I guess, now that I think about it. But if you're into those sub games, this game has that option for you. From what I did play with this game, it took me about 20 hours to complete. I've heard varying times in terms of how long it took others to beat. I know I'm usually the type of person that will just kind of derail and go straight for the main story, because this side content usually doesn't interest me that much. So your game time will probably be longer than that, especially if you like to go off of the beaten path. I had a really fun time with what I did play though. I think that it is a really solid game. I'm glad that I played through all of it. I'm going to give this game a 5 out of 5, and I think if you are a fan of these types of turn-based RPGs, you know, like Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi, Chrono Trigger, like those type of games, I think that you're really going to enjoy this game as well. Well guys, that's it for me. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about Sea of Stars, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye!